What's up, guys? Welcome back to the shop. Today's video we're going to be doing a little test. I'm going to be mixing steel powder with copper powder, and we're going to see if it actually makes a knife that's worth anything. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to prep up our cans. These cans are going to be an inch tall, and they're going to be 2" by 2" standard canister that I use. I'm just cutting them at 1". And we're going to be welding some caps on them. That way we can fill them up with our powder concoction, and it should work out pretty fine. As always, we're going to be filling them up with our spray paint. Make sure everything releases nice and even. As always, I like to use white spray paint versus using whiteout or anything else because of the ease of application. With just a couple of sprays, it gets a nice even coating, and you can get it in fast dry. Alright guys, so I have the 5 canisters here. They're ready. And pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little experiment. So I was thinking about this the other day, and I wanted to see what would happen if I mixed in copper powder with the steel powder that I use for knives. And not in a way where it is just thrown in a layer, but actually intermixed into the actual steel powder at different percentages. So to be able to test this out, I'm gonna take one of these guys, and it's gonna be my control, and this is just gonna be straight steel powder. And then the next one will be a 2% copper, a 5% copper, a 10% copper, and a 20% copper. And I'm gonna do it like this because I believe 2% looks pretty good. 5% might also be pretty good. 10% is definitely overkill. 20 is beyond overkill. But I want to see what it looks like and how it affects the properties of the knife. Maybe it won't even stick. Maybe it'll crumble apart. Maybe it'll affect the hardness of the knife, or whether it's hardenable, or any of that stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do all this by weight. So I'm going to get a scale, and I'm going to use my control, which, let's say it's going to be this guy, and I'm going to fill it up with steel powder, and we're going to weigh how much steel powder goes in there. And then separately we will do our math, and we will calculate what 2% is, what 4 or 5% is, what 10 and what 20% is, and we will mix them together in a cup and then fill up our canisters. All of this I will be doing in my oven. Even at 2000 degrees, if I hold it long enough and I press it quick, it does fuse all the steel powder into a solid billet. So it should work pretty well. I did it before with the other pieces that I tried before with the copper powder and the ball bearings. So it should work here theoretically. And so let's give it a try. So here we have our steel powder. It's from Maritime Knife Supply. It's 1090 steel powder. It's high carbon steel with a 2% nickel in it. And our copper powder is this powder that I got from Amazon, and it is a finer mesh than that steel over there, but regardless it should mix pretty well. So let's go ahead and get started and do our first one. So I'm gonna call it there, 162 grams. 161 grams, and that's going to be our control. Alright guys, so I did some quick math, and so my control is 161 grams of steel powder. For 2%, we're looking at 3.22 grams, so 3.2 grams of copper and 157.7 grams of steel. And then just to make it easier, I just kind of rounded up on these last ones. So for 5%, we got 8 grams copper, 153 grams of steel. For 10%, we got 16 grams copper, 145 grams of steel. And for the 20, we have 32 grams of copper and 129 grams of steel. So we're gonna go on ahead and mix these together and get our cans ready. We're gonna call that, oh, that's 4. We're just gonna call that 3. 0.2 grams. This thing just does single digit. 3 grams. 158. So the mixing in this process was a bit of a pain, since the different powders are different meshes. They are a little bit more difficult to incorporate together, especially in this tiny little cup that I'm using. So I had to go back and forth between filling it up and pouring it into another cup and kind of trying to get it mixed. The further along I went with higher percentages, the easier it was, but at the beginning it was definitely more difficult. And so I had all of them prepped, and we moved on to our forging. I didn't show all of them prepped because it just took so long to do it, but they were all definitely prepped. And one of the cool things that I like to see right here when I'm pressing them is how quickly they just squish together. There's very little resistance, and the reason for that is because the powder, even though it looks like I filled the canister really nice and well, nice and compact, there's still a lot of air in between all the different little grains of powder. So in general, a rule of thumb is that you want to reduce it by at least a third. So that's why it just compresses so easily and so quickly whenever I'm forging these. And it works the same whenever I'm forging the canisters. Alright guys, so we are out of the forge. We got the different canisters here. I've already gone ahead and cut off the sides, and we can pop off the tops, but I don't want to really separate them too much because I'm going to get confused. But you can see this was our control, and this is just straight steel powder. It's pretty cool how the oven, even though it only gets up to 2000 degrees, is hot enough to be able to forge weld it. So we got a solid bar right there, and that's number 1. Number 2, which had, I believe, 3%. I didn't open this one all the way. It's just cracked open. Alright, so I've gone on ahead and cracked it open. And this is what it looks like. And this one only had a very, very small percentage. It was, I want to say 3%. This one had 3 grams, which was 2%. So that's the same amount as the nickel content in it. It's actually more because we did 2% of the overall. Next is 3. 3 had 5%. This one has some surface cracks on it. This one has a pretty gnarly crack on it. Other than that, you can definitely see in there. This one has 5%. That's number 3. Now we get into number 4. Number 4 had 10%. It's not really visible. And finally number 5, which we put 20% in, which I expected to be the most messed up one. But if you look at it at an angle, you can see kind of like some orange coming through. But I'm not sure. So I'm gonna go on ahead, and I'm actually gonna forge all of these guys into small, I guess some really, really small knives, and that way we can grind them and see what the actual face of them looks like, and we can etch them, and we can, you know, go through all that and see how forgeable they are. Obviously this one's gonna forge fine because it's just the steel powder. This one, no, this one right here has 2%. I think it'll be fine. Even up to 5%, I think it's gonna be fine. We're probably gonna run into issues with those two. This one we might run into an issue with, but that's because of that big crack. But I'll throw some flux on it, and hopefully we can seal it up. And these two are the ones that hopefully are gonna show the most. But yep, we're gonna go on ahead and forge them all individually into some small knives. Remember how at the very beginning we started with 1-inch canisters, and I actually welded the tops on the top and on the bottom to the outside of the can, so I didn't put them on the inside, so it really was 1 inch worth of powder that was in there. And that 1 inch actually, once compressed down, just became a little bit over 1/8 of an inch, maybe a 1/4 of an inch, depending on how much copper it had in there. But that just goes to show how much actual compression goes along in turning these powders into solids. So what I'm doing here is I'm forging my knife. I'm starting off with the tip, trying to get the shape. I try to evenly distribute it because for these knives, since I'm really just wanting to look at the steel, I'm going for a full steel construction all the way through, which it's not going to be very thick, but I'm trying to make the handle be pretty comfortable in the hand, almost like a little scalpel, but I'm actually giving it some width so that you can hold it a little bit better, and I think I did a fairly decent job at it. So I ended up distributing the steel halfway through and using half for the blade portion and half for the handle portion. And here I'm just forging it pretty close to the shape that I want, and then I'm going in with my cross peen to make a little divot for your finger to fit into, just to make it a little bit more comfortable while holding. And this part was a little bit on the obnoxious side, I want to say, because it was difficult to hold and maintain, but I also wanted to get a decent angle for the camera, so I was kind of twisting my arm in a way I probably wouldn't normally be forging. But for the sake of getting the angle on the camera right, I ended up doing it that way. And so here I'm just forging a taper to my handle, and hopefully that works out well. And here I'm moving on to knife number 2. As you can see, knife number 2, I already started with a rectangle, and that's because while I was forging knife number 1, I was preforming this guy. And the reason why I did it that way is because I have 5 knives to forge, and so I decided to go on ahead and get a head start on the other one. All these knives are going to be relatively the same, so there was no point in showing the same process multiple times. I did do the finger groove with the press versus doing it by hand, and I kind of regret doing that because it made it much wider than I would normally make it if I just did it by hand. But I wanted to see if I could do it with the press. Moving forward, I'll probably just do it with the cross peen. It gives a better job and it comes out nicer. So as you can see here, we moved straight to number 4, and that's because I broke my 3rd billet that just snapped in half, and I'll explain that later in the video once I'm done with the forging. But we moved straight to number 4, and since I broke the other one in half, I figured I should try to just hand forge this one, and it started cracking, so I said the hell with it, I'm just gonna go full send, and I went along with the press. There's number 3 and there's number 4, and yep, they're cracking, so it's safe to assume that number 5 is gonna crack. So I just went straight at it with the press, and as you can see right there, pieces are just falling off. Alright guys, so here are the knives. So pretty much I'm gonna go through what happened. This one is nothing but steel powder, and this one forged pretty well. I have some minor cracks here and there, but that is normal from steel powder. Whenever I do a canister, I always get some kind of cracks as well, so that's normal. It's a nice little knife, came out pretty nice. So that's my base. So here is my 2%, which is about 3 grams, I believe, of the copper powder, and we forged out pretty well. So this one came out pretty well. No real issues, no real problems with the forging. It came out pretty nice. But while I was working on this one, I decided to throw this one in the fire, and I ended up forging it out into a rectangle off camera because I figured it'd be quicker. That way I wasn't going back and forth since I was making so many of these guys. And so since I did that on this one, I decided to do it on number 3 as well, and well, it just snapped in half. So I kind of wish I had done it on camera, so we could have seen, you know, could have at least recorded it, but it just snapped in half. and 4 started crumbling and 5 crumbled as well. So yeah, I'm assuming this was 5%, 10%, and 20%. So 2% works. 2% works. Anything more than that, I guess, is just gonna crumble. It can't hold its integrity. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna profile these two guys, and I'm gonna heat treat them, and then we'll come back to these later. I'll clean them up and we'll etch them as well, just to see what they look like. That's why I kind of flattened them out so we could clean them up and etch them. But for now, I'm gonna concentrate on these two and get these two ready, and we can heat treat them and finish grind them and make them proper little knives, and we can etch them as well. So from here on out is just basic shaping of the handle. Done the majority of the work with the 2x72. I have it pretty close to the shape that I want, so I'm not really removing a lot of steel. I'm just really touching it up and getting rid of any kind of tiny cracks I have on the knife. I do still end up with a few tiny cracks on the end, but for the sake of not making the knife any thinner, I just left them in there. They don't really hurt anything. And we go on to our quench. One thing I did notice is that I did not quench the other pieces, the ones that cracked, and that's my fault. I just didn't think about that. I probably would have gotten a better pattern at the end whenever I coffee etched them, but it happens. Alright guys, so we're at a temper. These guys hardened pretty nicely. We have these pieces here as well, and I'm gonna go ahead and grind those out so we can etch them. And I'm gonna finish grind these guys as well. Well, first I'm gonna finish grind these and get them ready for an etch, and hopefully they come out looking pretty good. I'm sure these are gonna look good. They're just, you know, not workable because they crack, which I was hoping number 3 would work out since it was only 5%. I was hoping this one would work out and we'd get a little bit more of that copper in there. But we're just gonna have to make do with this, and hopefully it looks good. So final grind width, as we would have expected, I put on a fresh belt, 36 grit, and got rid of any kind of residual scale or anything like that. And I proceeded going up in grits as I went through. I don't really show it all here because kind of just watching the grinding is boring. But I do go through multiple grits, and then I use Scotch-Brite belts to be able to clean them up. Since these knives aren't really very high-end kind of knives, I don't really like to spend more time than necessary on them, so I don't go through the whole hand sand process on these knives. Basically, I just clean them up to a 220 grit, and then I go with a Scotch-Brite on different levels of Scotch-Brite until I get to the extra fine, and I go on ahead and etch with that. And that does a pretty good job overall. If I was working with like a mosaic for this kind of knife, then I would definitely hand sand the entire knife. I also go on ahead and knock off and round off any and all corners, making sure I have a nice clean transition all the way around, and it's nice and comfortable on the fingers. And here is a look at what they look like after all my grinding. Overall, they're nice little knives, and they're very comfortable. So I'm going into my acid etch first, and then going off into my coffee etch. Here's where I'd like to ask you guys to like, comment, and subscribe if you like these videos, if you like what I do, if you like these little experiments. And let me know down below what you thought about this experiment. I was really hoping for more copper color, but as you can see later in the video, it's kind of a hit or miss with this. It does look cool, but it's not really what I was expecting. And if you want to help support the channel, you can do so by subscribing and by going to my website, which is in the description down below, and you can buy a knife. These knives will be for sale on there as well if you're interested in them. They're more cool little collection pieces than they are just usable knives. They do cut though. Alright guys, so we are done with our little experiment. We have the one that is just steel powder. We have the one with 2% copper, 5%, 10%, 20%. Now let's go over what I figured out, and that is that the 1% looks pretty cool. It's just grainy. And we have a little bit of overlap here, which gave us like these little lines, but other than that, it's just grainy looking, which I mean is to be expected. It is all just steel powder. But one thing I found is that even though it does sharpen well, it doesn't cut perfectly like I would say something with a steel core, and that is because since it is grainy, we're gonna have some little tiny spots of that nickel in there, and that nickel is gonna be a tiny little, I guess, tooth, you would say. So it makes the knife cuts, but it's more toothy than it would without it. The birds are talking to each other, you can hear them in the background. And here we have our 2%. Now our 2% isn't too much different than our no copper, other than it's a little bit darker. But other than that, it's pretty much identical. We have a little bit more movement in there. We have some little, like, almost like little browning in some areas. And I'm assuming that's just copper oxidizing. But since it has such little copper, I was hoping I would have some areas where it would actually look more copperish. But I didn't find any. So this is the 2%. I have the same issue with the edge. It's sharp. It cuts through paper, but then in some parts it'll snag a little. But I've checked the edge, and the edge is as sharp as I can get it. So I'm assuming it's going to be the same. If you're cutting something really fine, it might snag on it. But, I mean, anything else, it'll definitely cut right through it. And it's just because of that grain and the fact that that grain makes it more toothy. And here we have our 5%. And again, you can't really see anything. It just creates more of a pattern in the grain of it. I'm not sure how to explain it. It looks cool, but with that extra 3% of copper that we added to it, it became a lot more crumbly. So in the video, I never showed the forging of this one. That was because I was pre-prepping our preforms, and then I was just gonna record the forging just to make the video quicker. And in the forging of this from a square to a rectangle, this guy just snapped, and that was pretty much it. I just flattened it and called it a day on that one. And as you can see, this one is even more cracked than the last one. This is 10%. And you can see some little spots right there where there is copper on the outside surface, but you can't really see copper inside of it. And this is 10%, though you can see the different grains in there. And I guess the 10% made it even more unstable, and it just wasn't holding under force, which is the same reason why we don't forge copper knives downward. We don't try to forge them. We just forge out a big blank and cut our knife out from that. That's because the copper doesn't hold quite well while hot. It likes to split apart. So because of that, that's why we don't really forge it. And now moving to our best looking one, I'd say, but it's still the same. This is our 20%. Now here on our 20%, you can see the copper in there distributed a little bit better than the other ones. Well, actually, you see it way better than the other ones, but we run into the same issue where, because of all the copper that has been introduced into it, and since it's grain, it just kind of messes with the integrity of the actual billet, and so it just starts cracking like crazy. Though this grain is pretty, I would think that if I was gonna do this, I would have to do a canister, and I would have to just forge it all out. I would have to do a canister with a coarse steel and maybe a copper interlayer, and then this kind of powder, and just forge out a big blank, and then from there cut out the knife. And we could possibly have this grainy pattern on the outside of that knife, as long as there's no forging involved, because the actual pieces that I brought out looked good. The ones I got out of the cans looked good until that point where I had to actually start forging it to shape. but I wanted to see what forging did to it. And as you can see, forging kind of wrecked it. But I'm pretty hopeful that if I do that method that I just said, I could probably get a pretty good looking little grain pattern at the end. I don't know, it's just a thought for now. Maybe I'll give it a try in the future. But these guys ended up looking pretty good. And just as a quick explanation, this is a knife that I did a while back. I don't remember what I did for the cladding. Probably, I don't know, some kind of weird material. So this is a knife I did probably like a year ago. And you still have that, you have that copper powder, not the copper powder, you have that steel powdered grainy look in there. But it's not on the edge. It's separated from the edge, and as such, this knife is like razor sharp. When I don't run into the issues of the snagging on it because there's no powder on there. And so this knife is razor sharp, and the copper is that little interlayer in between. So that's pretty much what I'm talking about for trying it out with that 20% copper. And having this inner layer in between, and then just that grainy copper look that we get from this guy, where you have a little bit of color and a lot of just graininess to it. And if this actually works out, I might just buy some brass copper and mix it in and do a whole bunch of different elements and grains and stuff. I think it'll look cool. So that's it for this video, guys. These two will be available online for sale. Just they're cool little, pretty just collectible knives. They work for a lot of things. They're just not gonna cut very fine because of what I explained, but I think they're pretty cool little knives to have for anybody that likes to collect weird looking knives. And this guy is also going to be for sale on the website. I initially didn't want to sell it because it was a little bit on the heavy side. It's a pretty thick boy, but I mean, if you don't mind a thick, heavier knife, I mean, it looks pretty cool, and it's just collecting dust at my house, so I figured I'd put it for sale. So if you're interested in that, this guy will also be for sale on the website. And other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it, and catch you on the next one. Peace.